He came home 3 days early. No warning, no phone call ahead. And in the 30 seconds it took him to walk from his front door to his kitchen, a walk he had made 1,000 times before, everything he believed about his life turned out to be a carefully constructed lie. His wife was seated on the kitchen island, wine glass in hand, laughing. His mother was on the floor, on her knees, hands shaking, scrubbing marble with a soaked sponge while 3 women in designer clothes watched and made jokes about her age. This had been happening every single day for 2 months. While he was away building a future for his family, she was sleeping in the laundry room, on a folded blanket, on the floor. And she never said a word. Not because she was weak, because she loved her son more than she loved her own dignity. What Nathan Cole did next, the surveillance cameras, the files his attorney uncovered in 48 hours, the pregnancy that was medically impossible, and the moment he walked through his own front door in front of 22 witnesses and dismantled his wife's entire fabricated life in real time. That is a story you need to hear to the end. Because the ending does not belong to the woman who caused the pain. It belongs to the woman who survived it. Stay with us. Lesson statement. This story is for every person who has ever stayed silent to protect someone they love, and every person who has ever been protected by that silence without knowing it. What you are about to hear is a reminder that the people who love us quietly are often the bravest people in the room. Meaning statement. Eleanor's story is not just about betrayal. It is about what happens after, about the choice that exists on the other side of being broken, the choice between bitterness and purpose, about a woman who was treated as invisible and decided to spend the rest of her life making sure other people were seen. That choice is available to all of us, in smaller ways, every single day. If Eleanor's story moved you, if you found yourself nodding or crying or thinking of someone you know, there is one small thing you can do right now that costs you nothing and means more than you might think. Leave a comment below. Tell us what part of this story stayed with you. Tell us about someone in your life who loves quietly and deserves to be seen. We read every single one. And if you believe this kind of story deserves to reach more people, share it. One share puts it in front of someone who might need it today more than you know. Subscribe to this channel, because every week we bring you stories about real human strength, real consequences, and real second chances. Stories that remind you what people are actually capable of, both the worst of it and the very best. Like this video if you stayed until the end, because if you did, you already know why it matters. We will see you in the next story.
What would you do if you came home early and found the woman you loved treating your mother like a servant? Not a rough day, not a misunderstanding, not a moment of thoughtlessness that could be explained away over dinner. A deliberate, calculated humiliation. Happening every single day, for 2 months, while you were thousands of miles away, believing everything was fine. This is the story of Eleanor Cole, a 64-year-old former school teacher who raised her son on sacrifice and black coffee and the unshakable belief that love required you to give everything you had, even when everything you had was almost nothing at all. She scrubbed imported marble floors on arthritic knees. She slept in a laundry room on a folded blanket. She answered the phone every evening with a warm, cheerful voice and told her husband that everything was just wonderful, because she believed, with her whole worn-out heart, that suffering in silence was the most loving thing she could do. Stay with this story, because what Nathan Cole discovered when he walked through his own front door on a Thursday afternoon nobody expected will make your blood run cold. What he found in the files, his attorney assembled in 48 hours, will make you question everything you think you know about the people who say they love you. And what Eleanor Cole does in the final chapters of this story. What this quiet, overlooked woman builds from the wreckage of 2 months of humiliation. will make you want to stand up, right where you are, and applaud. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about what happens when someone mistakes your silence for weakness. They always regret that mistake. Always. The investment summit in Tokyo was supposed to last 4 full days. It lasted 11 hours. Nathan Cole was sitting in a 42nd floor conference room overlooking the glittering sprawl of the city when his Japanese partner, Hiroshi, pressed a hand to his chest mid-sentence, went the color of old paper, and quietly excused himself from the table. The paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. The deal, 18 months of careful negotiation, 3 transatlantic flights, and more late nights than Nathan could accurately count, was indefinitely postponed. Nathan sat in the emptied conference room for a long time after everyone left. He looked at the untouched tea service. He looked at the manila folders full of projections and proposals. Then he called his assistant, booked the next available flight back to San Francisco, and told himself the hollow feeling in his chest was just jet lag. He landed at SFO at 11:47 in the morning on a Thursday that nobody had anticipated. He did not call ahead. Cassie had a standing Thursday facial appointment that ran until 4. His mother, Eleanor, had been staying at the house for what was supposed to be a short visit, just a few days to finally get to know her daughter-in-law properly, to see the garden. To sit in the kitchen Nathan had spent 2 years designing with the big windows that caught the morning light exactly right. Eleanor had arrived the day before Nathan left for Tokyo, and they had shared exactly one breakfast together before his car came. That had been 8 weeks ago. Nathan assumed everything was fine. Eleanor called every evening. She sounded warm and cheerful and full of small, happy observations. The garden roses were coming in beautifully. Cassie had taken her to a lovely lunch downtown. The guest bedroom had the most comfortable mattress she had ever slept on in her life. He had no reason to think otherwise. He parked in his own driveway at 2:47 in the afternoon. The house looked exactly as it always did. The Pacific Heights mansion he had purchased 5 years ago, the one that had felt impossibly large and a little lonely until Cassie moved in with her perfume and her opinions and her talent for filling rooms. The hydrangeas along the front path were blooming. The flagstone was freshly swept. He pushed the mahogany front door open quietly, trying not to startle anyone. The house smelled like fresh flowers and expensive wine. And then he heard the laughter. It came from the kitchen. Sharp, bright, cruel in the specific way that laughter becomes cruel when it is directed at someone who cannot defend themselves. Nathan recognized Cassie's voice immediately. He recognized 2 of the other voices as well, Maggie Holloway, whose husband Thomas was a federal judge and who wore her social position like a crown, and a woman named Brooke, whose last name he could never remember. He set his carry-on bag quietly by the door. He walked toward the kitchen. The voices grew sharper with every step. He reached the kitchen door, left slightly open, and stopped. What he saw through that narrow gap rearranged something fundamental inside him. Not broke it, exactly. Rearranged it. The way an earthquake rearranges the contents of a room without necessarily destroying the walls. Eleanor was on the floor. His 64-year-old mother, who had taught 5th grade for 31 years, who had read to him every night until he was old enough to be embarrassed by it, who had once driven 4 hours in a snowstorm to bring him homemade soup when he had the flu in his first apartment, was on her hands and knees on his imported marble floor, gripping a soaking wet sponge, with fingers that were swollen and trembling. She was scrubbing. Her gray hair was matted against her forehead. Her thin shoulders moved with the effort. She was panting softly, the kind of panting you hear from someone who is pushing a body past what it wants to give. Cassie was sitting on the edge of the kitchen island, legs crossed, holding a crystal wine glass with the casual elegance of a woman who had never once in her life been required to clean anything. Maggie Holloway, wearing a cream silk blouse and a harem scarf the color of autumn leaves, was laughing hard enough that she had to press the scarf against the corner of her eye. "Eleanor, honey," Cassie said, her voice carrying the particular warmth of someone who is enjoying themselves thoroughly. "You missed a spot. Right there." "No, there. The one directly to your left." Eleanor adjusted without a word. She found the spot. She scrubbed it. "I swear," Maggie said in a low, delighted voice, "Nathan's mother moves like a Roomba with low battery." The laughter that followed this observation was genuinely enthusiastic. Brooke, the one whose last name Nathan could never remember, leaned forward with her elbows on the island and studied Eleanor with the detached curiosity of someone watching an exhibit at a museum. "Victoria, you really should get a proper housekeeper, someone younger. This is almost painful to watch." "She's free," Cassie said pleasantly, "and she's very motivated." She reached across the island, picked up a glass of water, and with a small, deliberate motion of her wrist, tipped it. The water splashed across the section of floor Eleanor had just finished cleaning. "Oh, for goodness sake," Cassie said in a voice of exquisite fake regret. "I've made a mess. Eleanor, could you get that? And do make sure you get it properly this time." Eleanor stopped. For one single moment, she was perfectly still. Then she dipped the sponge back into the bucket, and she began again. Nathan stood at that door for what felt like a very long time. He was 38 years old. He had built a technology company from a rented garage and 2 credit cards. He had negotiated with difficult people in 6 countries. He was not, by any reasonable measure, a man who was easily undone, but he stood at that kitchen door and felt something drain out of him, some structural element he hadn't known he was relying on until it was gone. He backed away from the door. He walked back through the grand foyer, past his carry-on bag, out the front door, down the flagstone path, and got back into his car. He sat there. He gripped the steering wheel, and Nathan Cole, for the first time since he was 7 years old, cried. He cried for the woman on the floor with the wet sponge. He cried for the 31 years of 5th-grade classrooms and 4-hour drives through snowstorms and homemade soup. He cried because he had built this house and filled it with the wrong person, and his mother who never complained, who never asked for anything, who would starve herself in the dark rather than let him go hungry, had somehow ended up paying for that mistake on her hands and knees. When the tears stopped, Nathan wiped his face with the back of his hand. He picked up his phone. He called Diana Hartwell. Diana picked up on the first ring because Diana Hartwell always picked up on the first ring. It was one of approximately 40 things about her that Nathan deeply relied on and occasionally found mildly terrifying. "Nathan," she said, "you sound terrible. Is this a business problem or a wife problem?" Nathan looked at his house through the windshield. Through the kitchen window, he could see the soft movement of people inside, the flicker of expensive afternoon light. "Both," he said. A brief pause. "Give me 48 hours, Diana said. Diana Hartwell operated her law practice from a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district that was aggressively, almost philosophically, organized. Every file in its place, every call logged, every deadline circled in red on a physical calendar, because Diana did not entirely trust clouds to hold important information. Her paralegal was a 24-year-old named Kevin, who was extraordinarily bright, deeply earnest, and occasionally so literal in his interpretation of instructions that working with him required a specific kind of patience that Diana had spent 3 years developing. She sent Kevin to pull background documentation on Cassandra Cole at 9:15 the morning after Nathan's call. Kevin sent the background check request to the wrong Cassandra Cole. There were, it turned out, 4 women named Cassandra Cole in the Greater Bay Area. Kevin had selected the second one alphabetically, who was a 71-year-old retired librarian living in Fresno who had no criminal record, an excellent credit score, and absolutely no idea why a law firm was requesting her personal history. The retired librarian called Diana's office at 11:30 and expressed her feelings about the situation with considerable precision for a woman who had spent her career helping people find information quietly. Diana handled the call. She then walked to Kevin's desk and looked at him for 10 full seconds without speaking. "I am going to need you to send an apology gift," she said finally. "I was thinking wine," Kevin said. "Do that?" Kevin sent beef jerky. He felt it was more practical. Diana decided not to address this and redirected him to the correct Cassandra Cole. Meanwhile, Nathan had checked himself into a downtown hotel under a false name. The same instinct for operational discretion that had served him well in business negotiations applied here with grim efficiency. He took meetings remotely. He answered emails. He called Eleanor every evening at 7 o'clock, and Eleanor answered in her warm, unhurried voice and told him that everything was just wonderful, that the roses were beautiful, that Cassie was being so generous. Nathan listened to his mother's careful cheerfulness and felt the weight of it settle in his chest like river stone. Diana called him back at 9 in the morning, 46 hours after their first conversation. "I need you in my office," she said. "Now." "Did you find something?" "Finding something," Diana said, "is a significant understatement. How fast can you get here?" Her office was quieter than usual when Nathan arrived. Kevin had been sent on an extended errand involving court filings that Diana had timed carefully to keep him out of the building for at least 2 hours. Diana met Nathan at the conference room door and closed it behind them. The table was covered in manila folders, printed documents, and 3 separate stacks of photographs held together with rubber bands. Diana did not offer coffee. She sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table. "Her name," Diana said, "is not Cassandra Cole. It is Cassandra Marie Wells. Cole was her mother's maiden name, which she adopted informally when she was 26 and has never legally changed. She has also used the names Cassandra Whitmore and Cassandra Rains." Nathan was very still. "The charitable organization she told you she ran, the one with the certificates and the gala photographs? The Meridian Foundation," Nathan said, "does not exist. Has never existed. The certificates were purchased from a website based in Nevada that also sells novelty diplomas and fake honorary degrees. The gala photographs, she was present at those events, as the paid companion of the men writing the largest donation checks." Nathan looked at the table. "She worked as a licensed luxury companion for 6 years, Diana continued, her voice measured and careful. "High-end, discreet, wealthy clients. She was skilled at it, from what I can determine. She was also, during that same period, building a very specific set of competencies that had nothing to do with companionship." Diana slid a stack of documents across the table. 2 civil fraud suits, both settled quietly under non-disclosure agreements. 1 criminal forgery charge in Cook County, dismissed on a technicality, when the key witness relocated unexpectedly. "She has done a version of what she is doing with you in Atlanta and in Chicago." The Atlanta man lost his house. The Chicago man... Diana paused briefly. He recovered, eventually. Nathan picked up the documents. He put them down. "She told me she had never been married," he said. "She has never been legally married," Diana confirmed. "She came close, in Atlanta. The man discovered the fraud before the wedding. She left the state within 72 hours. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "How did she find me?" he asked. Diana opened the last folder. She turned it so Nathan could see the photographs inside. Printed from surveillance footage, time-stamped, annotated in Diana's precise handwriting. The mugging, Diana said. 3 years ago. Nathan remembered it with perfect clarity. A dark street, 2 men, the sick lurch of genuine fear. And then Cassie appearing from nowhere, screaming for the police, the men scattering, Cassie breathless and brave and somehow exactly there. He had thought it was fate. The 2 men's names are Gary Potts and Dennis Waller, Diana said. They are on the payroll of a man named Brett Lawson. They were each paid $800 to stage the robbery with explicit instructions to run the moment a woman matching Cassie's description appeared. The conference room was very quiet. She engineered the moment I fell in love with her, Nathan said. It was not a question. Diana said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. Nathan sat with that for a moment. He thought about the dark street. He thought about the way his heart had felt in the weeks after, like something that had been handed a gift it hadn't earned and was half afraid to hold too tightly in case it disappeared. He thought about how thoroughly, how professionally he had been studied. "Who is Brett Lawson?" he asked. Diana's expression did not change, but something around her eyes sharpened very slightly. "That," she said, "is a conversation we will need to return to. But first, Nathan, there is something else. Something I need you to hear carefully." She waited until he met her eyes. "Cassie called you about a pregnancy." Nathan had told Diana everything on that first call. He had held nothing back, because Diana was not someone you held things back from if you wanted her help to mean anything. "She did," he said. "You told me you had a vasectomy 26 months ago. And Cassie does not know." "No?" Diana breathed in slowly. "Nathan, the child she is carrying, and I do believe she is genuinely pregnant, belongs to Brett Lawson. They have been together for 6 years. They were together before she met you. The most recent photograph I have of them was taken 3 weeks ago." She slid the photograph across the table. Cassie and a man Nathan did not recognize, broad-shouldered, heavily tattooed, with the comfortable posture of someone who had never spent a day worrying about consequences, were toasting with champagne at a restaurant table. Cassie was laughing. Her hand rested on his arm. Nathan looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked up at Diana. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "First," Diana said, "you are going to go back to that hotel, and tomorrow morning, a security technician I trust completely is going to walk into your house, while Cassie is at her Thursday facial appointment. And every conversation that happens in that house from this moment forward is going to be preserved in high-definition video on an encrypted cloud server that Cassie cannot access, cannot destroy, and cannot explain away in any courtroom in this country." Nathan nodded once. "And then," Diana said, "we wait." The security technician's name was Ray. He was former military in the specific way that some people are former military, not as a fact about their past, but as a permanent characteristic of how they move through space and time, quietly, efficiently, with the calm of someone who had long ago made peace with the reality that most problems, approached correctly, had solutions. Ray arrived at Nathan's house at 10:50 on a Friday morning, 40 minutes after Cassie's car left for her facial appointment. He entered through the back, using the key Nathan had messaged him the code for. He worked without music, without unnecessary movement, without once checking his phone. By 2 in the afternoon, 11 micro cameras were installed throughout the house, in kitchen light fixtures, behind oil paintings in the living room, in the ornate ceiling moldings of the master bedroom hallway. At the top of the main staircase, microphones were placed behind the large decorative mirrors in the foyer and the kitchen. While working in the kitchen pantry, Ray discovered something unexpected. He photographed it carefully. He replaced everything exactly as he had found it. He sent Nathan a single text message, one word and one emoji. The word was interesting. The emoji was a pumpkin. Nathan stared at his phone screen for a full minute before replying, "Explain." Ray's response, $23,000. Cash. Inside the decorative pumpkin on the middle pantry shelf. Photographed and documented. Nathan set his phone face down on the hotel bed and looked at the ceiling. He thought about the decorative pumpkin. He had bought it at a farmer's market 2 autumns ago. He had thought it was charming. Cassie had said it was a little folksy, but she supposed it had a certain rustic appeal. He picked his phone back up and replied, "Leave it exactly where it is." "Already done," Ray sent back. The cameras went live at 3:15 that afternoon. Nathan sat in his hotel room with his laptop open to the secure monitoring application and watched his own house. It felt surreal in a way he had no useful framework for, like watching a play set in a theater you had built with your own hands. Cassie arrived home at 4:40. She walked through the front door with the particular energy of someone who had spent 2 hours being professionally attended to and found it satisfying. She dropped her bag on the white sofa. She called out for Eleanor. Eleanor appeared from the back of the house, moving slowly, carrying a basket of clean laundry. The basket was large. Eleanor was not. "Why didn't you answer immediately?" Cassie said, not unkindly. The tone was worse than unkindness. It was the tone of someone who considers their irritation to be entirely the other person's problem. "I called twice. I'm sorry, Cassie. I was finishing the towels." "Leave the towels. I need the guest bathroom scrubbed before tomorrow. Maggie is coming for lunch, and she notices everything." "Of course," Eleanor said. She set the laundry basket on the hallway floor and went to get the cleaning supplies. Nathan watched. His hands were flat on the desk, on either side of the laptop. He was making a conscious effort not to close the screen. Over the next 4 days, he watched his house. He watched Cassie instruct Eleanor on where to sleep, the laundry room, on a folded blanket. Because the guest bedroom was now housing Cassie's overflow wardrobe and the Peloton she used 3 times a week. He watched Cassie's friends arrive for lunches and afternoon wine, watched them treat Eleanor with the particular casualness of people who have categorized someone as invisible and are no longer performing for them. He watched Maggie Holloway rate Eleanor's floor cleaning technique the way a restaurant critic reviews a disappointing meal. He watched Brooke suggest, as a joke that clearly was not entirely a joke, that Eleanor could wash their cars. He watched Brett Lawson let himself into the house with a key on a Tuesday afternoon and make himself at home in Nathan's living room with his feet on Nathan's coffee table and Nathan's $400 scotch in his hand, in Bijawons. And then, on the 4th night, at 11 o'clock, Nathan watched Eleanor. The kitchen was empty. The house was quiet. Eleanor stood at the counter, moving slowly, making herself a cup of tea with the deliberate care of someone whose hands were not entirely cooperating. When the tea was made, she did not sit at the kitchen table. She stood at the counter and drank it there, because the kitchen table was set for 2, and sitting at it alone would have required her to acknowledge something she was clearly not ready to acknowledge. She finished the tea. She rinsed the cup. She dried it and put it back in exactly the right cabinet. Then she reached into the pocket of her worn apron and pulled out a photograph. Nathan leaned forward. It was small and faded. The kind of photograph that has been handled so many times it is softened at the edges. He zoomed the camera feed on his laptop until he could see it clearly. It was him, 6 years old, maybe 7, gap-toothed, laughing, sitting on Eleanor's lap in a garden he barely remembered, somewhere before Pacific Heights and investment summits and mahogany front doors. Eleanor held the photograph in both hands. She looked at it for a long moment, then she brought it to her lips, very gently, and kissed it. "Just a little longer, baby," she whispered to the photograph. "He'll be home soon, and when he is, everything will have been worth it." Nathan closed the laptop. He sat in the dark hotel room. He was not crying this time. He was past crying. He was somewhere on the other side of grief, in the territory that has no name, but that every person eventually finds. The place where sadness hardens into something quieter and more purposeful. He picked up his phone. He called his father. Frank Cole answered on the third ring with the particular alertness of a man who understood that late-night calls from his son were not casual. "Nathan, what's wrong?" It was not a question. "Dad, I need you to fly here tonight." "Son, it's after 10. I know. Buy the ticket. I'll cover everything. I'll explain when you land." A pause. "Is your mother okay?" Nathan thought about the photograph. He thought about the laundry room floor. He thought about the cup of tea drunk standing at the counter, because sitting at the table alone would have cost too much. "She will be," Nathan said. "But Dad, I need you here." Frank Cole was on a flight by midnight. Frank arrived at the hotel at 6:15 in the morning, still wearing his jacket from the flight, carrying nothing but a small overnight bag and the expression of a man who had been asking himself questions for 7 hours that he did not yet have answers to. Nathan met him in the lobby. They embraced in the brief, solid way of fathers and sons who love each other deeply and find elaborate demonstrations of it slightly unnecessary. "Show me," Frank said. They went upstairs. Nathan opened the laptop. He played the footage in sequence. 4 days of surveillance, organized by Diana's team into a coherent documentary of his mother's 2 months in that house. Frank sat in the desk chair and watched. He watched Eleanor scrub floors. He watched her make meals she would not eat at the table. He watched Cassie's friends treat her like a piece of furniture that had been left in an inconvenient location. He watched the laundry room. He watched Eleanor pull the photograph from her apron pocket at 11 o'clock at night. Frank Cole had worked construction for 40 years. He had carried roof tiles in July heat. He had broken 2 fingers on a job site in 1987 and finished the shift. He was not, by any reasonable external measure, a man given to visible emotion. He cried. Nathan had never seen his father cry. The experience was deeply disorienting, like watching a building you thought was permanent turn out to be temporary. Frank cried silently, with his jaw tight and his rough hands gripping the arms of the desk chair, and Nathan sat beside him and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. When it was over, Frank wiped his face with the back of his hand. He straightened. He looked at Nathan. "What are you planning?" he asked. "I need to show you 3 more things first," Nathan said. "And Dad, I need you to stay in your chair while I do." Frank looked at him steadily. "Show me." The first thing Nathan showed him was the footage from day 6. Cassie, moving quickly through the kitchen, impatient and distracted, had come around the corner of the doorway at the same moment Eleanor was coming through it from the other direction. The collision was brief and violent. Cassie drove her shoulder into Eleanor's with the unstudied force of someone who had simply not bothered to look, and Eleanor stumbled hard backward, her hip striking the sharp granite edge of the counter. She grabbed the wall. She did not fall. She steadied herself, took one careful breath, and adjusted her grip on the dish towel she was carrying. Cassie did not look back. Eleanor stood against the wall for 3 seconds, Then she straightened up and kept moving. Frank made a sound Nathan had never heard his father make before. "That bruise," Nathan said quietly. "The one on her arm she kept covering. That's where it came from." Frank's hands tightened on the chair. "The second thing," Nathan said. He pulled up his phone and played the voicemail. Cassie's voice, breathless and warm and perfectly pitched. "Nathan, baby, are you sitting down? I have the most wonderful news. We're pregnant. Can you believe it? We're going to have a baby." Frank looked at him. "I had a vasectomy 26 months ago," Nathan said. "She doesn't know. The child belongs to Brett Lawson. She's planning to use the pregnancy to extract $50,000 a month in child support and then disappear with Lawson to Portugal." The silence in the hotel room was very dense. "How do you know all of this?" Frank asked. Nathan pulled up the audio from the living room camera. Tuesday afternoon, Brett on the sofa, Cassie beside him, Nathan's scotch in Brett's hand, the recording crisp and clear. Brett's voice filled the hotel room. $50,000 a month minimum. His lawyers will fight it down to 35. We take 35, disappear to Portugal. Done. And Cassie's voice, smooth and satisfied. He swallowed the pregnancy story completely. Men like Nathan feel too guilty to question the woman they love. Frank stood up. "Dad," Nathan said, "stay with me." Frank stood at the window with his back to the room for a long moment. His shoulders were rigid. His hands, Nathan could see, were fists. Then he turned around. "The third thing," he said. Nathan hesitated. "Show me the third thing, Nathan." Nathan pulled up the footage from day 3. Maggie Holloway, visiting for lunch, moving through the kitchen with the proprietary ease of someone who felt at home everywhere. Maggie was sharp. Sharper than Brooke, sharper than the other women, sharper in the specific way that made her either an asset or a liability, depending entirely on which direction her attention was pointed. She noticed something odd about the light fixture above the kitchen island. She tilted her head. She stepped closer. She reached up. Nathan had been watching this live when it happened. He had been texting Diana from the hotel room. "We have a problem. She's going to find the camera." He had been already calculating. If the camera was discovered, the confrontation would have to happen immediately. Without the full package of documentation Diana needed, without Frank, without the legal filings that would prevent Cassie from immediately liquidating and disappearing. And then Eleanor walked in. She came through the kitchen door carrying a full laundry basket. The oversized one, stacked high with clean towels, and walked directly into Maggie's extended arm. The laundry went everywhere. White towels cascaded across the kitchen floor in a soft avalanche. Maggie jumped back, startled and irritated. Eleanor apologized immediately, profusely, beginning to gather the towels from the floor. Maggie waved her off with the impatient gesture of someone who has been interrupted from something important, but cannot quite remember what it was, stepped over 2 towels, and walked out of the kitchen toward the living room where Cassie and the others were waiting. She did not look at the light fixture again. Frank watched the whole sequence without speaking. "She didn't know," Nathan said. "She had no idea she just saved everything." Frank looked at the laptop screen. He looked at the image of Eleanor, alone on the kitchen floor, carefully refolding each towel, moving slowly because of the hip. "No," Frank said quietly. "She knew exactly what she was doing." Nathan was not sure his father was right, but he was not sure he was wrong either. That night, the third catastrophic day, Nathan watched something that made him reach forward and turn off the laptop screen, with hands that were not entirely steady. Cassie, in a bright mood after an afternoon with her friends, walked into the kitchen where Eleanor was preparing dinner. She stood behind Eleanor for a moment with the particular quality of presence that precedes something unpleasant. Then she said, conversationally, "By the way, After the pregnancy announcement party next Saturday, I'd like you to arrange to go back to your husbands. Nathan and I will be starting a family now. It would be a little crowded. Eleanor's hands stilled on the cutting board. She was very quiet for a moment. "Of course," she said. "Good," Cassie said. "I'll tell Nathan you got homesick." She poured herself a glass of wine and left the kitchen. Eleanor stood at the cutting board. She did not move for a long time. Then she set down the knife, very carefully, and pressed her hands flat on the counter in front of her. She stood like that, both hands flat, head slightly bowed, for 30 seconds. Then she picked up the knife and went back to making dinner. Nathan turned off the screen. He sat in the dark for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Diana. "I have everything I need," he said. "How soon can we move?" Brett Lawson arrived at the house on a Tuesday evening carrying grocery store flowers and a bottle of Prosecco. The flowers were slightly wilted, the kind of flowers purchased from the cooler near the checkout lane by someone else who remembered he should probably bring something and grabbed the first available option. The Prosecco was in a bag with tissue paper. Brett had clearly put some thought into the tissue paper. It was an interesting combination of impulses. He handed the flowers to Eleanor, who answered the door because Cassie had called out from upstairs for her to get it. Eleanor accepted the flowers with 2 hands and a polite nod. "Is there a vase I should put these in?" Brett asked. "I'll take care of them," Eleanor said. She brought them to the kitchen and found a vase and trimmed the stems and arranged the flowers with the same careful attention she gave to everything, because Eleanor Cole did not know how to do things carelessly. While she was doing this, she could hear Brett in the living room pouring the Prosecco with great authority and announcing its virtues. He pronounced it Pro-Sec-O with enormous confidence. Eleanor, alone in the kitchen, silently mouthed the correct pronunciation to the flowers. She set the vase on the counter and went to the laundry room. In the hotel room, Nathan watched the live camera feed. Diana was on the phone with him, also watching on her own secure connection from her office. "The flowers were from the grocery store," Diana observed. "Yes. A man who is planning to collect $35,000 a month in fraudulent child support bought grocery store flowers." "I noticed that too," Nathan said. "It tells us something about his planning horizon," Diana said. The conversation that followed between Brett and Cassie on Nathan's sofa lasted 1 hour and 14 minutes, and every second of it was preserved in high-definition audio and video on an encrypted server that Cassie did not know existed. They discussed the pregnancy. Brett was the biological father. This had been the plan from the beginning. Cassie would become pregnant by Brett, claim the child was Nathan's, and use the child support arrangement as a long-term income stream before they eventually dissolved the marriage and relocated. "What if he demands a paternity test?" Brett asked. "He won't," Cassie said, with the calm of someone who has studied their subject carefully. Men like Nathan feel responsible for the women in their lives. He'll feel too guilty to question it. Questioning it would mean admitting he suspects me, and admitting he suspects me would require him to examine everything he's chosen to believe for 3 years. She paused, swirling her glass. "Nathan is very good at examining other people's decisions," she said. "He is considerably less practiced at examining his own." Brett considered this. "And the old woman, what happens to her after the announcement?" "She leaves. I tell Nathan she got homesick. She won't contradict me." "How do you know?" Cassie looked at Brett with the expression of someone who has had this thought many times and finds it slightly tedious to explain. "Because she loves him," Cassie said simply. "She thinks keeping quiet is how she protects him. She actually believes that. It's the most useful thing about her." Brett was quiet for a moment. "She's not going to say anything? Even now?" After 2 months of this? She hasn't said a word, Cassie said. Not to Nathan, not to the husband, not to anyone. She shook her head with something that might have been genuine admiration. She is, I will give her this, extraordinarily stubborn about suffering in silence. Eleanor walked through the living room at that moment, carrying a stack of folded linens. She moved past the sofa without looking at either of them, eyes on the middle distance, steps careful on the hardwood. Brett watched her pass. Does she hear us? It doesn't matter if she does, Cassie said. Where is she going to go with it? Eleanor disappeared through the hallway door. In the hotel room, Nathan watched the camera feed until Eleanor reappeared in the back hallway, alone. She set the linens down on the shelf outside the laundry room. She stood with her hands braced against the wall for a moment. She had heard everything. Her face, in the camera's clear resolution, was doing something complicated. The expression of someone who has just understood something that they already knew but had been hoping was not true. Then she squared her shoulders. She picked up the linens. She carried them into the laundry room and began putting them away. Diana's voice came through the phone, very quiet. Nathan, we have everything we need. I'm going to need 3 days to prepare the filings. Nathan was watching Eleanor through the camera. She was putting towels on shelves, methodically, one at a time. 3 days, he said. 72 hours. Can you hold on for 72 hours? Nathan watched his mother put a white towel on the bottom shelf, smooth it flat with both hands, and move to the next one. Yes, he said. Good, Diana said. Because after those 72 hours, Cassie Cole is going to wish she had chosen a completely different line of work. Sophie Cole arrived from Denver at 3 in the afternoon on a Friday, 40 minutes late because her connection had been delayed, and she had spent the intervening time in the Denver airport feeding her 3-week-old daughter in a family restroom and mentally composing the things she intended to say to Cassie, which she knew she would not actually be permitted to say, which made composing them feel both necessary and futile. She came straight to the hotel from the airport. She had left the baby with her mother-in-law and brought nothing but a carry-on bag and an expression that Nathan recognized from childhood, the particular set of Sophie's face that meant she was holding her feelings in temporary containment and would not be doing so much longer. Show me, she said, before she had even taken off her jacket. Nathan showed her. Sophie watched the surveillance footage for 22 minutes. She cried for the last 8 of those minutes. Not the quiet tears Nathan had shed in his car, or the silent grief of their father in the hotel chair, but the active, furious crying of someone who is angry that they are sad. When it was over, she stood up and walked to the window. Okay, she said after a moment. Her voice was steady again. The containment was back in operation. Tell me what I can do. There's actually something specific, Nathan said. Sophie turned around. Name it. I need you to be in that room Saturday night. Sophie blinked. The party. Cassie has organized a pregnancy announcement dinner for 22 of their friends. I need you, me, Diana, and Dad to walk through that front door together. Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing the geometry of this. She's going to make the announcement, Sophie said slowly, in front of everyone she knows. And then we walk in, Nathan said. Sophie looked at him. Something in her face settled into certainty. Yes, she said. I'll be there. Diana arrived at the hotel suite at 5 with the document package. A portable filing cabinet's worth of legal preparation compressed into 3 folders held together with enormous rubber bands, which was Diana's version of casual. She spread the materials across the hotel room's small table and walked them through it with the focused efficiency of someone who finds nothing more satisfying than a well-constructed case. The package included certified medical records of the vasectomy, complete financial forensics showing $1.84 million transferred from Nathan's accounts to offshore entities over 28 months, routed through 4 different shell companies with enough complexity to indicate professional help. Criminal background documentation on Cassie and Brett, sworn affidavits from 2 of Cassie's previous victims, an evidence highlight reel from the surveillance footage edited to 12 minutes, and a cease and desist filed against Brett Lawson that morning. Every major law firm she might approach has already been sent conflict of interest notifications, Diana said. That won't prevent her from finding counsel, but it will slow her down and signal to whoever she does find that this case is not going to be the kind of easy settlement she's managed before. Frank, who had been sitting in the chair by the window with his arms crossed, asked the question he had clearly been building toward for some time. "Can I be there? Saturday night?" "Absolutely," Nathan said immediately. "Good," Frank said. His voice was very quiet. "I want Eleanor to see me walk through that door. I want the first thing she sees to be that she's not alone in that room anymore." The silence that followed was complete. Sophie broke it, because Sophie had a reliable instinct for when silence needed breaking. "That," she said, pressing 2 fingers briefly to her sternum, "is the most romantic thing Dad has ever said." Frank looked at her. "Don't make it weird, Sophie." "I'm absolutely making it weird, Dad. This is a weird situation." Diana gathered her folders. "We move at 8:15. Cassie will tap the champagne glass between 8 and 8:30. She'll want the room fully settled and the champagne poured before she makes the announcement. We enter immediately after." "And Mom?" Nathan asked. "Eleanor will be there," Diana said. "Serving, as usual." She paused. "Which is actually important. I want her in that room when it happens." "We haven't told her anything," Nathan said. "I know," Diana said. "Don't." Nathan looked at her. "She'll try to stop it," Diana said simply. "She'll think she's protecting you. Let her find out the same way everyone else does. It's the only way she'll believe it's real." Nathan thought about this. He thought about Eleanor's face in the kitchen camera. The quiet, devastating patience of someone who has decided that silence is a form of love. "All right," he said. Frank stood up from the chair by the window. "Saturday night," he said. It was not a question or a plan. It was a statement of fact, delivered in the tone of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was finally setting it down. The mansion on Saturday evening was the most beautiful it had ever looked. Cassie had spent $8,000 on catering, florals, and a string quartet, who played in the foyer with the polished restraint of musicians who understood they were ambiance and conducted themselves accordingly. 12 round tables with white linen, crystal and silver, candles and tall glass holders, roses in arrangements so architecturally precise they looked almost artificial. 22 guests arrived between 7 and 7:45. They were expensively dressed, warmly animated, and in the full grip of the particular social pleasure of being included in something. Maggie and Thomas Holloway arrived together. Maggie in pale blue silk, Thomas in a dark suit with the bearing of a man who had spent 20 years in federal courtrooms and found most other environments slightly understimulating. Eleanor moved through the room with trays of canapes. She was wearing the plain gray uniform Cassie had provided, essentially a domestic worker's outfit. She moved carefully, attentively, keeping her eyes on the trays and the guests' hands and the empty glasses that needed clearing. Nobody looked at her. She was completely invisible to the room. Not through any deliberate decision on the guest's part, but through the social mechanism by which certain people in certain contexts simply stop registering. The canapé tray appeared, the glass was refilled, the uniform moved through the peripheral vision, and was processed as furniture. Eleanor collected empty glasses. She refilled the water pitchers. She carried a tray of stuffed mushrooms through the room twice without once meeting anyone's eyes. Nathan watched from the hotel room through his phone until 7:58, when he put the phone in his jacket pocket and walked downstairs to the car where Diana, Frank, and Sophie were waiting. They drove the 6 blocks to the house in silence. At 8:13, through the living room window, Nathan could see the string quartet setting down their bows. He could see Cassie moving to the center of the room. He could see the guests drawing toward her with the instinctive gravity that beautiful, confident, expensively dressed women can generate when they choose to. "Now," Nathan said. They walked up the flagstone path. Nathan opened the front door. He walked in first. Dark suit, no expression, the particular stillness of someone who has prepared so thoroughly for a moment that when it arrives, they feel almost nothing. Or rather, feel everything so completely that it achieves a kind of equilibrium. Diana came in behind him, carrying the document folder. Frank. Sophie, who had spent 3 weeks on maternity leave running on 4 hours of sleep a night, and was, Nathan thought, the most genuinely terrifying person in the building. The string quartet had put their instruments down. The room was very quiet. Cassie was in the center of the room. She was wearing a deep blue silk dress that cost more than Eleanor's car. Her hair was perfect. Her champagne glass was held at exactly the right height. She had just opened her mouth to speak when the front door opened. She saw Nathan. For one single second, the span of a caught breath, the room held the absolute perfection of Cassie's fabricated life. The flowers, the music, the gathered friends, the champagne, the announcement about to be made. 1 second, then it collapsed. "Nathan," Cassie said, her voice pitched exactly one careful note too high. "Baby Toa, you're home early." "I'm right on time," Nathan said. He walked to the center of the room, not toward Cassie, to the center, so that everyone in the space was equidistant from him, so that what he was about to say was addressed to all of them equally. He looked around the room. He saw Maggie Holloway's face and watched something begin to shift in it. A presentiment of disaster, an intelligence that was, Nathan suspected, considerably better than she generally allowed anyone to see. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," Nathan said. His voice was completely level. "I wouldn't have missed this announcement for anything. As it happens, I have a few things I'd like to share as well." He turned to Diana. She opened the folder and removed the certified medical document. She handed it to Nathan. Nathan held it up so the room could see the hospital letterhead, the official stamps, the signature of the attending surgeon. "I had a vasectomy 26 months ago," he said. "The document in my hand is the certified medical record. The child Cassie is carrying is not mine. His name, the father's name, is Brett Lawson." The room did not react immediately. There was a fraction of a second, the kind of delay that happens when information is too large to process at the speed at which it arrives. Then the room erupted. Cassie stepped forward. "That is a lie. Here is the hospital stamp," Nathan said, turning the document toward the nearest guests. "Here is the surgeon's legally binding signature. Here is the date, 26 months ago, which is 14 months before Cassie and I were married." He handed the document to Diana. He nodded at her. Diana aimed the small remote she was holding at the wall-mounted television above the fireplace. The screen came to life. Brett Lawson's voice filled the room, unmistakable, conversational. Recorded in the living room. They were standing in. $50,000 a month minimum. His lawyers will fight it down to 35. We take 35, disappear to Portugal. Cassie moved. Fast. She lunged toward the television, with both hands, reaching for the cord, Frank stepped into her path. He moved with the unhurried certainty of a man who has been waiting for this specific moment for several days and is not going to miss it. He was 67 years old, and he had built things with his hands his entire life, and he was considerably larger than Cassie had perhaps registered. He stopped directly in front of her and looked at her without speaking. "Frank," she started. "No," he said. One word. That was all. Cassie stopped. The television continued. Brett's voice: "She cries every night because she misses him. She's so easy to manage when she's guilty." And then Cassie's voice, smooth and precise: "Eleanor is actually useful. She's too afraid of disrupting Nathan's happiness to tell him anything. It's the most convenient thing about her." The room was absolutely silent, and then the footage changed. The kitchen. 11 p.m., Eleanor alone at the counter, the photograph in both hands, her lips forming words the microphone caught clearly. "Just a little longer, baby. He'll be home soon, and when he is, everything will have been worth it." The room heard it. Maggie Holloway, who had laughed at Eleanor 14 days ago with a Hermes scarf pressed to the corner of her eye, made a sound like she had been struck. Not loud, small and involuntary, the sound of something hitting its target precisely. "Oh my God," Maggie said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "That's his mother. That's Nathan's mother." She turned to the room, to no one, to everyone. "I sat in this kitchen and laughed at her, and I didn't even know." She turned to her husband. Thomas Holloway looked at the television screen with the expression of a federal judge who is already, professionally, beginning to process what he is seeing. And then Eleanor walked into the room. She had heard everything. She had been in the kitchen, clearing the dessert plates that had been set out in advance, and the house's acoustics, the high ceilings, the marble floors, the open archway, had carried every word to her clearly. She stood in the archway to the living room. She was wearing the gray uniform. She was holding a silver serving tray. She looked at the room, at the frozen guests, at the television screen, which showed her own face, her own hands, her own private midnight grief, now visible to 22 strangers in her son's house. Her eyes found Nathan. He crossed the room in 4 steps and put his arms around her. And Eleanor, who had been carrying this alone for 2 months, who had not made a single sound of distress in 60 days, who had folded every towel and scrubbed every floor and answered every phone call with warmth and cheer, finally, quietly, came apart. She cried against Nathan's shoulder. The room watched. Nobody spoke. The silence held for almost a full minute. Then Diana stepped forward with the legal documentation, and the room began to move again. Not quickly, but with the particular deliberate motion of a situation resolving according to its own internal logic. Cassie, who had been standing frozen since the moment Eleanor appeared in the archway, suddenly found her voice. "This is an invasion of privacy," she said. Her tone had changed completely. The warmth and social fluency were gone, replaced by something harder and more economical. The mask, Nathan thought, simply off. "Those recordings are illegal. You cannot use them in court. I will have them thrown out. California is a 2-party consent state for audio recordings," Diana said pleasantly. "However, video recordings in common areas of a private residence owned by the recording party are entirely admissible. Nathan owns this home. Every camera was installed in a common area. Every court in this state will accept this footage." Cassie stared at her. "Additionally," Diana continued, "the financial forensics are entirely independent of the recordings. The offshore transfer documentation comes from bank records, not cameras. Thomas Holloway stepped forward from beside his wife. "Diana," he said quietly, "I need to speak with you. Privately." Diana glanced at Nathan. He nodded slightly. She followed Thomas into the foyer, pulling the door almost closed behind them. In the living room, the guests had begun to separate into small clusters, some people leaving quietly, others staying with the inability to remove themselves from something this significant. Several people had their phones out. One woman, who had been a bridesmaid at Nathan and Cassie's wedding, was sitting in a chair with her hand pressed to her mouth. Sophie had positioned herself near the doorway with her arms crossed, which was essentially her natural resting posture in any situation she found problematic, which was most situations. After 8 minutes, Diana returned. Her expression, Nathan noted, was doing something unusual. Diana Hartwell had one of the most controlled faces he had ever encountered. 30 years of courtrooms had given her a physiognomy that revealed almost nothing. But something around her eyes was different. Something that was almost, in Diana Hartwell's specific and restrained register, awe. "Nathan," she said. She paused, which Diana almost never did. "I need you to hear something." She looked at Cassie, then back at Nathan. "Brett Lawson is currently under federal investigation for wire fraud. Has been for 14 months. The offshore account structure Cassie used to transfer your money, the shell company routing, the account names, the jurisdictions, is the same structure connected to Brett's federal case." Diana paused again. By using it, Cassie has made herself an unregistered co-conspirator in a federal criminal investigation. The room was very quiet. "She didn't know?" Nathan said. "Brett apparently did not mention it," Diana confirmed. "The federal case accelerated 3 months ago. The accounts were already flagged when Cassie started using them." Nathan looked at Cassie. Cassie's face had gone the color of the white roses in the centerpieces. "Brett," Nathan said, "knew his accounts were flagged." "Yes," Diana said. "And he let her use them anyway. It appears so." Nathan considered this. Then he said, "Call Brett." "I already did," Diana said. "I called him 2 hours ago. I informed him that Cassie was pregnant and that the accounts had been connected." "And?" Diana's expression shifted to something that, in anyone else, would have been satisfaction. In Diana, it was a microscopic adjustment of 2 facial muscles. "He blocked her number on every platform before I finished the sentence." The sound that came out of Cassie's throat was small and involuntary. The sound of someone discovering, in real time, the exact weight of the thing they had built their plan on. From across the room, Maggie Holloway spoke. "Nathan?" Her voice was different from any way Nathan had heard it before. The social ease was entirely gone. What remained was something direct and stripped down. A woman speaking from a register she clearly did not use very often. "I need to tell you something," Maggie said. "And I need you to know that I am deeply, genuinely ashamed." She looked at Eleanor, who was still standing near Nathan. Composed now, the tears finished, watching with the quiet attention of someone who has decided to be present for whatever happens next. "6 weeks ago, your mother asked to borrow my phone," Maggie said. "She said she wanted to call her husband. She said her own phone was being repaired." Nathan heard the slight catch in Maggie's voice. "I told her to ask Cassie," Maggie said. "I didn't ask why she couldn't use her own phone. I didn't ask why she looked the way she looked when she asked me. I just went back to whatever I was doing." She pressed her lips together briefly. She just wanted to hear her husband's voice, and I made it more difficult. Thomas Holloway put his hand on his wife's arm. She let him. The room was very quiet. Sophie leaned toward Nathan and said, in a voice pitched for him alone, "For what it's worth, I always thought her Hermes scarf was an ugly color. Nathan, despite everything, Despite the weight of the past 8 weeks, the hotel room, the laptop screen, the photograph in the apron pocket, all of it, felt something loosen very slightly in his chest. "Sophie," he murmured. "I know," she said. "I know. I'm just saying." Cassie was given 45 minutes to collect her personal belongings. Diana stood in the hallway and documented what she took, item by item, ensuring nothing purchased with Nathan's accounts left the building. Cassie moved through the house with the mechanical efficiency of someone who has done this before, which Nathan now knew she had. At the front door, she turned. She looked at Nathan with an expression that had shed every layer of performance and arrived at something unadorned and cold. "You're going to regret this," she said. Nathan looked at her. He thought about the dark street 3 years ago and the two men who had been paid $800 each and the woman who had appeared exactly on cue. "The only thing I regret," he said, "is every late night I worked thinking I was building something for us." Cassie walked out. The heavy door closed behind her. Frank put his hand on Nathan's shoulder. In the kitchen, Eleanor was quietly clearing the dessert plates that were never served. Cassie was arrested 23 days later. She had managed to collect her passport and a carry-on bag and make it to the international terminal at SFO before the federal agent stepped forward at the gate. Her name had been on the no-fly list for 6 days. Diana had filed the request the Monday after the party, citing the ongoing federal investigation. The arresting officer noted, in his report, that she appeared unsurprised. The court hearing happened on a Tuesday. The Anderson family sat together in the front row. Nathan, Frank, Eleanor, Sophie, and Sophie's husband, who had flown in from Denver with the baby strapped to his chest because they could not find childcare on short notice, and Sophie refused to miss the hearing. The baby slept through the entire proceeding, which Sophie considered a personal victory. Thomas Holloway was not presiding. The case was outside his jurisdiction, but he was present in the gallery, seated next to his wife because Maggie had asked to be there and Thomas went where Maggie went. The charges were read in full: matrimonial fraud, financial embezzlement of $1.84 million, criminal document forgery, conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud, and sustained psychological abuse, resulting in documented physical harm to Eleanor Cole. The federal wire fraud connection had sealed everything. Brett Lawson's case had collapsed 3 weeks after the party when Brett, presented with the full evidence package, had chosen cooperation over silence. He had given the federal prosecutors everything, including a detailed account of the long-term relationship with Cassie and the specific roles each of them had played in the scheme. Brett received 7 years in a federal facility. Cassie received 3 years as part of a plea agreement, plus full financial restitution of the stolen funds, plus civil damages of $400,000 payable to Eleanor Cole for psychological and physical harm. The judge, in delivering the sentence, noted that the sustained psychological manipulation of an elderly woman was among the more deliberately cruel elements of the case he had seen, and that the court took a particularly dim view of using familial love as a mechanism of control. Cassie said nothing when the sentence was read. She looked at the table in front of her with the expression of someone calculating something. As they were leaving the courthouse, all 6 of them, plus the sleeping baby, plus Diana, who had allowed herself the specific satisfaction of watching a case she had built be delivered its verdict, a man approached them from the courthouse steps. He was tall, older than Frank, perhaps, with the bearing of someone who had once been very confident and had recently had considerable reason to reconsider. He wore a good coat. He held his hat in both hands. "Are you the Anderson family?" he asked. "We are," Nathan said carefully. My name is Richard Wells, the man said. I'm Victoria's father. He caught himself. Cassie's. Her name is Cassie. I've called her Victoria her whole life. I don't know why she changed it. He looked down at his hat. I came here because I needed to say something, and I didn't know how to say it except to say it directly. He looked at Eleanor. My wife and I watched the recordings that were presented in the preliminary hearing, he said. My wife had to stop watching 3 times. He stopped briefly. I raised that girl. I don't know where this came from. I don't know what I missed, or what I failed to see, or whether there was something I should have done differently when she was young. I think about it constantly. I will think about it for the rest of my life. Eleanor looked at him. She had the quality, at that moment, of someone who has passed through something very difficult and arrived on the other side in possession of a clarity they did not previously have. Mr. Wells, she said, you are not responsible for choices your adult daughter made. Children become who they decide to become. You can grieve that, but you cannot carry it. The man's eyes were bright. I wanted you to know that I am sorry, that it happened in my daughter's name, that you... He stopped, started again. That you deserved far better than what you received in that house. I did, Eleanor agreed simply. But I am all right. She said it without performance or reassurance. It was simply true, and everyone present understood that it was true, and that the simplicity of it was the most powerful thing she could have said. Richard Wells reached into his coat and produced a business card. He held it out to Nathan. I run a charitable foundation, he said. We work with women who have experienced domestic, psychological abuse. If your mother would ever be willing to speak, to consult, to be involved in any capacity, I would be honored. More than honored. Nathan took the card. He looked at his mother. Eleanor looked at the card in Nathan's hand. She looked at Richard Wells. She looked at the courthouse steps and the gray San Francisco sky and the sleeping baby strapped to her son-in-law's chest. Give me the card, she said. Nathan handed it to her. She looked at it. Yes, Eleanor said. I think I will. 6 months later, the house was different, not in its square footage, or its architecture, or the quality of its finishes. All of that was exactly as it had been. What was different was less measurable. Something in the air, the way the light moved through the rooms, the quality of the sounds the house made, meals being prepared without dread, doors opening without anticipatory tension, laughter that was not pointed at anyone. Frank had moved into the East Wing. Nathan had spent 3 weeks working with a contractor to convert the East Wing into a proper apartment, a sitting room, a bedroom with the right kind of natural light, a workshop in the attached garage with proper ventilation, and a good workbench. Frank had inspected every detail with the critical eye of a man who had built things his entire life and had opinions about joinery. He had built Eleanor a porch swing from cedar wood he selected himself at the lumber yard, spending 45 minutes in the yard pressing his thumb into the grain of each board. The swing took 11 days. He did not rush. Sophie visited from Denver every other weekend, which meant the house was periodically inhabited by a baby who had opinions about everything and expressed them freely. The baby's first word had been more, which Eleanor declared entirely characteristic, and Sophie claimed was the pediatrician's fault for encouraging self-expression. The space that had been Cassie's dressing room, the walk-in closet converted to wardrobe overflow, the room where Eleanor had once been told to sleep, was now the operational office of a program called Eleanor's Voices. It had started simply. Eleanor had called Richard Wells the week after the courthouse, and they had met for coffee, and Eleanor had talked for 2 hours about what it felt like to be in that house. Not the physical experience, but the architecture of the psychological control. The way each small accommodation had seemed reasonable in isolation. The way fear and love had been systematically confused. The way silence had been cultivated and then weaponized. Richard had listened without interrupting. At the end, he had said, "Would you be willing to do that again? For an audience?" The first seminar was held in the community room of a women's shelter in the Mission District on a rainy Thursday afternoon. 34 women attended. Some of them had walked in from nearby. Some had driven 2 hours. Eleanor stood at the front of the room in a blue dress that Frank had picked out. He had gone to the department store himself, spent 20 minutes, and come home with one dress and a bag and an expression that suggested he considered the matter thoroughly handled. She had prepared nothing. She spoke for 40 minutes from the place that hurt because she had found in the months since everything had ended that speaking from the place that hurt was the only thing that worked. Anything else, anything shaped, polished, structured into lessons, rang slightly false, slightly performed, and the women in those rooms could hear the difference. "I want to tell you something they don't usually put in the self-help books," Eleanor said. "The hardest moment isn't when someone treats you badly. The hardest moment is when you realize you stayed not because you were weak, but because you were protecting someone you loved." The room was very quiet. "I stayed in that house because I believed, completely and sincerely, that leaving would hurt my son. I was wrong about that. But the love behind the decision was real. And I want you to hear that clearly, because I think many of you have been told that staying makes you weak. I want to offer you a different possibility." She paused. "It makes you human. Profoundly, vulnerably human. And the courage required to redirect that love toward yourself, toward what you actually deserve, is the hardest thing I have ever done in 64 years of living, which means it is also the most worthwhile." After the seminar, a woman named Chloe waited until the room had mostly cleared. She was young, late 20s, perhaps, and she stood with her arms crossed in the self-protective posture of someone who had been practicing not taking up space. "I saw your interview," she said, "on the local news. She stopped. "I don't know where to start." Eleanor looked at her. "Start with the part that hurts the most," she said. "That's always the right place." Chloe unfolded her arms. She looked at her hands. She said, "My husband makes me feel like I'm stupid, like everything I think is wrong, like the way I do things is always slightly not good enough. He never—" She paused. "He's never hit me. So I keep thinking I don't have the right to—" "Psychological abuse," Eleanor said gently, "does not require physical contact. What you are describing has a name, it has documented patterns, and it has resources, legal, practical, financial, that exist specifically for people in your situation." She looked at Chloe steadily. "You have every right." Nathan, who had come to the first seminar to watch from the back of the room, stood in the doorway and listened to his mother talk to Chloe for 45 minutes. He watched Eleanor write down 3 phone numbers, 2 websites, and the name of a specific attorney who specialized in this area. He watched Eleanor hold Chloe's hand while she cried. He watched Eleanor tell Chloe, without drama or embellishment, exactly what resources were available and exactly what the next 3 steps were. When Chloe finally left, there was something in her posture that had shifted, not dramatically, not visibly, perhaps, to a casual observer, but Nathan could see it. He walked to the front of the room. "Mom," he said, "come outside. I want to show you something." They walked back to the house. The 6 blocks that Nathan now sometimes thought of as the distance between who things had been and who they were becoming. The afternoon fog was beginning to gather over the bay, the way it did in San Francisco, arriving without announcement. Nathan led Eleanor around to the back of the house, where there had been a stretch of empty lawn behind the garden. There was now a building. It was not large. It was painted warm yellow, the color of the inside of a sunflower. It had a proper entrance with a covered porch and a wide door. Beside the door, mounted at eye level, was a bronze plaque. Eleanor walked up to it. She read it. She read it again. The Ivy Anderson Care Center. The name, Nathan said from beside her, is from a conversation I had with Diana, actually. She said your name should be on it. I said you went by Eleanor now. She said... He paused. She said, that's the name you gave yourself. Ivy is the name you gave your son. Eleanor pressed her fingers to the plaque. There are 10 rooms inside, Nathan said. Counseling, legal assistance, financial literacy workshops, job placement support. Everything is free. We have a foundation set up that will sustain the operating costs for 12 years at current projections. He looked at her, and we have a director, if she'll accept. Eleanor looked at the plaque. She looked at the warm yellow building in the gray San Francisco afternoon. You did this, she said. You taught me to, Nathan said. He stood beside her, and he said the thing he had been carrying since the hotel room, since the laptop screen, and the worn photograph and the cup of tea drunk standing at the counter. You taught me that pain has 2 doors. One leads to bitterness. One leads to purpose. You walked through the second door while you were still in the middle of the worst thing. While you still didn't know how it ended, you made that choice in the dark, without knowing it was a choice. Eleanor was quiet. I spent 8 weeks, Nathan continued, feeling guilty that I didn't see what was happening in my own house. And I've spent the 6 months since understanding that the guilt is real and that it is also not the most important thing. The most important thing is what we build now. He gestured at the building, at the plaque, at the warm yellow paint. This is what we build, he said. Eleanor turned to him. Her eyes were bright, but she was not crying. She was past crying, in the way that people sometimes get past crying, not because the feeling is smaller, but because it has become too large to express through tears and has converted instead into something else. Presence. Clarity. My boy, she said. She put her hand against his face. The gesture of a mother, ancient and specific, unchanged since he was 6 years old in a plastic swimming pool, laughing gap-toothed into the camera of a woman who had nothing except her willingness to give everything. I willingly starved in the cold so you could study, she said. I cleaned floors that weren't mine so you wouldn't have to know what was happening. I did those things not because I was weak, but because I loved you more than I loved my own comfort. She looked at him steadily. But I want you to hear something, Nathan. Those things were not the best of me. What you've built here, what we're going to build here, this is what all of that was for. This is the point of it. Nathan covered her hand with his. From inside the house, the screen door opened, and Frank appeared in the doorway. He looked at them. He looked at the building. He looked at the plaque. He said nothing for a moment. Then, coffee's ready. Stop being emotional. It's 4 p.m. Sophie, who was standing just behind him with the baby on her hip. Dad, let them have the moment. Frank, they're having it outside where it's cold. They can have it inside with coffee. The baby, who had been observing the entire exchange with the impartial attention of someone who has not yet formed opinions about appropriate emotional expression timelines, said, "More." Everyone looked at her. She wants more of the moment, Sophie said. She wants more of the graham cracker I gave her 20 minutes ago, Frank said. We don't know that, Dad. Sophie, I'm just saying, she might be emotionally advanced. The inauguration of the Ivy Anderson Care Center took place 1 week later on a Saturday morning when the fog had cleared and the bay was blue and sharp. 112 women attended. They came from the Mission, from Oakland, from Marin, from towns Nathan had never heard of. Some came alone, some came with their children, some came with the specific careful walk of people who have not yet decided whether they are safe to be there. Eleanor stood at the podium that Nathan had rented from a party supply company, which was a detail she found unexpectedly charming. That her son, who had purchased a Pacific Heights mansion in cash, had rented a podium from a party supply company because it seemed the right scale for the occasion. She looked out at the room. She spoke without notes. I was humiliated in ways that are difficult to describe, she began. I was made to sleep on floors. I was made to feel that my presence in my own son's home was a problem to be managed. I was told, in 100 small ways every day, that my value was conditional, that I was worth exactly as much as my usefulness to someone who did not see me as a person. The room was completely still. I want to tell you what I learned. Not the lesson you would write in a book. The lesson you learn in the body, in the middle of a night when you are folding someone else's laundry in a room with no window. She paused. Your pain only defeats you when you surrender to it. But here's the other side of that truth. And this is the thing I could not have told you a year ago because I had not yet learned it. When you choose to carry your pain into purpose, when you decide that what happened to you will be the reason someone else is not alone in what happens to them, the pain does not disappear, but it changes. It becomes something that has weight and direction. It becomes something you are moving forward rather than something that is holding you down. She looked at the room, at the 112 faces, at the women who had come from far away, and the women who had almost not come at all. You are here because something happened to you that should not have happened. You are also here because you survived it. I want you to know that those two things, the wound and the survival, are not in competition. They are both true, and the survival is stronger. The applause, when it came, was not the polished applause of a professional event. It was the applause of people who needed to put their hands together, who needed the physical expression of recognition, of being seen, of seeing themselves in someone else's words. Eleanor stepped back from the podium. Nathan was standing at the back of the room. He was not applauding. He was watching his mother's face in the moment after she finished speaking, the specific expression of someone who has said exactly what they came to say and can feel that it landed exactly where it was meant to. He thought about the hotel room. He thought about the laptop screen. He thought about the pumpkin emoji and Diana's almost awe and his father's tears and Sophie's husband with the baby strapped to his chest in a federal courtroom. He thought about a woman on a kitchen floor with a wet sponge and the quiet, devastating patience of someone who has decided that silence is a form of love, and the long, difficult work of understanding that it does not have to be. That evening, the Anderson family gathered in the living room, Eleanor on the sofa, Frank beside her, close, with the ease of two people who have been in proximity for 40 years and no longer need to perform it. Sophie in the armchair, nursing the baby, who had, the previous Tuesday, learned the word no and was employing it with considerable enthusiasm. Nathan in the chair by the window. They did not talk about the day. They talked about the cedar swing Frank was building for Sophie's back deck in Denver and whether the fog was going to stay through the weekend, and whether the baby was actually developing early verbal skills, or whether Sophie was projecting. The living room light was warm. The fog outside the window was silver. Eleanor looked at her family. She looked at the room. She looked at the window, and the fog and the light. She thought about a kitchen floor in November. She thought about a plastic swimming pool in summer. She thought about a photograph so worn at the edges, it had gone soft. She thought about the distance between those things, the length of a life, the width of what love requires, the particular courage of choosing purpose over bitterness in the dark when you cannot yet see where the door is. She thought about the 112 women in a warm yellow building 6 blocks away. She reached over and put her hand over Frank's. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Eleanor smiled. "That everything was worth it," she said. "Every single bit of it." Outside, the California wind moved through the garden, through the roses that were coming in beautifully, through the cedar swing on the porch, through the warm yellow building, and the bronze plaque beside the wide door. And if the wind carried anything, it carried this: that the measure of a person is not what is done to them. It is what they build from what remains. That silence chosen from love is not weakness, but silence is not the only form love can take. That the woman who scrubs the floor is not defined by the floor. She is defined by what she does when she finally stands up. Eleanor stood up, and everything after that was hers. Editorial disclaimer. The content you just heard was carefully researched, constructed, and manually edited by our team, not generated carelessly or automatically, but built with intention, scene by scene, to carry meaning and deliver a story worth your time. We believe that stories are not just entertainment. They are how human beings process truth, build empathy, and remind each other that no one is entirely alone in what they carry. Thank you for listening.